Hey, welcome to Flite Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Simple Scout. Now, if you haven't seen the release video of the FT Simple Scout, it's one of our Simple Series airplanes. Now, the vision behind the Simple Series is minimal parts, quick and easy build, and extraordinary performance and also versatility in the air. Our goal is to be able to have people learn how to build, how to fly, and how to grow all in one airframe. Now, the really cool thing about the Simple Scout is it may look like it has some complicated lines, but it's incredibly easy to build. And as all of our plans before, you can choose to support us by going and getting the speed build kit, or you can build it off of our free downloadable plans. All the links will be down below for you. One of our favorite activities about the Simple Scout is also flying FPV from the cockpit. Look for links down below as well to see how we did that and how you can do it as well too. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. Now, it's really important before we install the servos that we center them and we also install the proper servo horns. This is going to change from model to model. So in this one here, these are the 9051s. This process is the same even if you're using the ES0882s, which are 9-gram servos. These are 4.5 grams. Now with different builds, there's different servo arms. Make sure you use a single-sided servo arm in this build, and we're also going to install our push rods to the closest to the screw. These servos are incredibly high quality, even though they're very economical. I'm going to put this on to show you how well centered they are from the factory. I'm going to plug this into our servo centering tool. If you don't have one of these tools, it is so convenient and so useful in so many ways. I strongly recommend you getting it. This is only about $7 from our store. We'll have a link down below for you to use. On the side of a servo centering tool, you're going to notice 3 indicators. You got your servo, which is your signal wire, your positive, and your negative. We're going to line up the ground wire with the negative, the power's in the middle, and the signal wire, which is usually white or yellow, will be on the top. For powering this, a simple quick tip that you can do if you don't have a single cell battery is using the balance lead of a 2 or 3 cell battery. Now you're going to notice on the battery you always have a power indicated wire. So here's your positive red, all the rest are considered negatives, and we're going to only take the red one up to line up with the power and the ground on the servo centering tool. You don't want to put a 2 cell on this because it's going to destroy your tool and your servos and void your warranty. So now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to plug my power line into the middle, my ground going down towards the bottom, and now I have 1 cell worth of power. Now you're going to notice that these multiple ports are here. It doesn't matter which plug you plug in to power your unit, and you can center 3 servos at one time. This tool also works to test motors and ESCs. Now that we have this, you can see that I can move my servo back and forth with no problem. Now I was talking about how well centered this is up. I'm going to turn this to the extreme, and I'm going to clip center, and you're going to see it's spot on from the factory. You never want to take this for granted because if you do and you install this and you power it on, you're going to use all your sub trims and all your trim to override it. What centered servo technically is basically just telling the servo to be in the center position so it has equal throws both ways. Now with this servo guide, if I flip the center and you see something like this, all you need to do is install your servo horn at 90 degrees. Once we're happy with that center, we're going to drop in the shortest little screw and twist it down in. You notice with my fingers I supported the screw as I turned it in so I didn't strip out the gears. Now we're going to do the exact same on the opposite one. The only difference is we want this servo horn to go the other direction. Kaboom skis. Plug it in. There you go, once again centered beautifully. Drop the shortest screw in our pack in there. And there we have it. The Emax servo is one of our favorite servos. We've been using them forever. The only time we ever get failures is in a very hard crash or if someone puts too much voltage through it. Alright, our servos are now centered. Our control horns are on. We're ready to move to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to build the Powerpod, mount the motor, install the ESC, and make sure your motor is spinning in the proper direction. Now before we get started on the main portion of our build, the first thing we're going to want to assemble is our Powerpod. This portion right here, along with the firewall, is our Powerpod. This is going to carry our motor and ESC, and also interchange from many of the other mini swappables. An easy tip for not cutting through the paper is to dull the very tip of your knife. Now you can do this by rubbing it over a piece of sandpaper, or just simply take it down to the floor and drag it on the concrete a couple times. Don't do this if you have carpet. To get started with our Powerpod, we're first going to do a light score down through our 2 score lines. Now if you're scratch building, this is going to be indicated by a red line. Just take the blade down close to the paper, but don't go through it. We're going to fold 180 degrees over and peel off the foam. We're going to do this on both sides. Right, now that our cavities are cleared out, we're going to go ahead and do an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side cheeks go above the bottom plate. To practice this move for gluing, we're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table and rotate the bottom plate 90 degrees while pushing down firmly on the table. This is going to give us a nice clean 90-degree edge with the bottom plate below the side plate. Once we practice that move, we're going to put a thin bead of glue, starting and stopping the bead of glue about a 1/4 inch from the edge. Once we have that, we're going to rotate 90 degrees and we're going to hold it there for about 45 seconds. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. We're going to focus the main portion of glue on an A-fold on the bottom of the side plate. That way we get most of the strength in our joint and not on the paper. Once again, our side plate is on the bottom. Rotate it 90 degrees and hold for 45 seconds. At this point, we're ready to glue on our firewall. For reference on what side we glue the firewall, we're going to look at what direction the A is pointing to. On many of our little mini models, we have quite a degree of right thrust, and we want to be able to keep that to keep the performance good. On different models, it may be pointing towards a flat 90-degree angle, and that will be on things like the Arrow and the Sparrow. Once we have the side that we need, we're going to put a healthy bead of glue on the very top surface. And we're going to drop our firewall in. While that's drying, we're going to take off about 5 inches of packing tape. And we're going to go right over the top, centering it up, pushing down towards the sides. This is going to be where all your strength is coming from, not from the glue. So don't neglect this step or your motor is going to pop off in flight or during an impact in the ground. Just like wrapping a gift for Christmas, we're going to cut 2 little reliefs. We're going to fold the edges in. Now we can go back and cut off any excess that we may have. Now at this point, it's very important that we remove the tape from the center section and also where our screw holes are going to be. If we don't remove this tape, the shaft of the motor is going to rub against that and it's going to cause it to bind and make you think that you have an ESC or a motor problem. It's easy to overheat the ESC if you don't do this step and destroy it. So now our center hole is opened up, and I've also relieved both the bigger holes for the 2204 motor. Now this mini Powerpod can carry an 1806 A pack or a 2204 motor, which is the B pack right here. The 1806 will use the 2 thinner holes that are vertical. The 2204 will use the horizontal holes that are bigger. I'm going to install the F pack or the 2204 motor right now. This motor is real nice. It even comes with a little Allen wrench for you to use. We're going to take this apart. Notice we have bullet connectors, so there's no soldering needed. We make sure that every power pack that we carry in our store has bullet connectors, so it's just plug and play. You don't need to solder. Now I want to take special attention towards these screws. You're going to notice a couple of these screws are shorter than the other ones. This is very important. We want to separate the long and the short screws from each other and get the long screws completely out of the picture. Reason being is we're only going to use the short screws in this step. Now this is the same for the A pack as well. If you run the long screws through the firewall, it's going to hit the windings and it's going to cause the motor to short out and potentially destroy your motor and your ESC and void your warranty. So make sure you separate these screws right now. With our short screws isolated and ready to be used, I'm going to go ahead and just open up these holes just a little bit. I'm actually going to just use the tip of my Allen wrench here. With a little twisting motion, just open it up a touch. This is going to make installing our motors even easier. There we go. If you have any hot glue in the back, just knock that out of the way. Make sure your screws can pass through nice and easy. We're going to go ahead and pre-thread our short screw. Notice I'm saying short a lot. It's because it's so important. Most of the time when you have a motor or ESC problem, it's because too long of screws have come in and hit the windings on the motor, or that you have tape in the center section. I'm going to screw this down to just bring it out maybe a 1/2 millimeter, just enough for the threads to engage with the motor. I'm going to do that on both sides. There we go. Now the motor has two spacings. It has a short width and a long width. I believe this is 16 millimeters and this is 19 millimeters. We're going to focus on the portion that's 16 millimeters. We're going to wiggle it around until it centers up right over those screws. There, you kind of hear it pop in there. Now we're going to go back and forth just a half turn at a time until we feel both screws engaging. We don't want to lift our motor off of the firewall. We want the screw to engage the back of the motor and to thread in nice and even. So when we tighten this down, the motor ends up firmly against the firewall and not lifted off. While we're doing this, you'll see that there's a gap in here between the motor. You can inspect that every couple turns to make sure that the threads don't get anywhere close to the windings. Do this on every motor you install, not just the Powerpods, but quadcopters, planes, anything that you install. Make sure that those screws are not too long. Now that our motor is installed into our Powerpod, we're going to go ahead and connect our ESC. You're going to see 3 wires that'll plug right in to our motor. Once again, if you're using any of our power packs, all these bullets are pre-soldered to go with the proper motors, so just plug and play. One thing you want to make sure is don't leave these out just a little bit so they can touch and short out. That's going to burn up your motor and your ESC. Make sure they're nice and closed and there's no exposed brass. Now that we have that, we can take this over to our little servo centering tool, and I'm going to turn it to manual and turn it all the way to 0. I'm going to plug in the lead of our ESC. Now that we have that, I'm going to plug this in. It's now activated. 3 beeps means it's a 3-cell battery. I'm going to turn this very slowly. Now you're going to see that this motor is turning clockwise. We want this to spin counterclockwise because this is a tractor style plane that it's installing into. It's not a wing. So because of that, I'm going to take 2 of these leads and I'm going to swap them. In our beginner series, we cover a lot of the details on how these motors work, the science behind it, and also things like ESC calibrations, etc. Now that we swapped this, I'm going to power it up. And now the motor spins counterclockwise, and that's the direction we want. Always make sure, especially with the minis, that if you have right thrust, you want this to spin counterclockwise. Otherwise, it's going to pull off to the left, and you won't be able to recover from it. Our motor's now spinning properly. We're ready for our build. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to prepare and assemble your wing. So for building the wing, we're going to want to get the following pieces. We're going to have our left and right wing panels. We're also going to have our center spar and our dihedral gauge. Let's go ahead and prepare our pieces by removing the foam from these sections that you see right here. I'm going to use the end of the blade that we dolled on the concrete. I'm just going to slide it right down through. Just go ahead and trace out every single one here. Now this is a common technique with all of our airplanes here, where we remove a cavity of foam and then we fold it with an A-fold, B-fold, or a fold over. The cleaner you get this cavity, the better the plane's going to fold together. Alright, with folds like this, it's easiest just to roll this over 180 degrees. Hold down one edge and just roll up the other edge. Now if you're scratch building this, you may notice that your foam is white. That's the Adams Ready board. This brown foam board is our Flite test foam, which is water resistant. This is going to make the plane last a lot longer and is also very easy to paint. You can see if you take your time and get it really close to that paper, it just rolls out nice and clean. There we go. While we're at it, we're going to be putting the ailerons in later, so let's go ahead and remove our little cavities here. I'll just use the razor blade to pop those out. So let's go ahead and take a moment to study each piece here. We have our left and right panels, we have the cavities removed from each side, and then we have our center spar with both the left and right cavity removed. Let's go ahead and remove these panels here and put these to the side and put our attention right now towards our center spar. Now this center spar is going to give you all the strength that you need to have a nice strong wing. You're going to notice here that we have an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side plates are above the bottom plate. So anytime you see an A or a B fold, it's the orientation to what it is to the top or bottom plate. Now for an A-fold, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the side plate firmly on the ground, and we're going to go ahead and do a practice fold by rotating this up 90 degrees, keeping the bottom plate underneath the side plate that's firmly on the table. Once we practice that fold a couple times and we're happy with it, we're going to take our hot glue gun, and I'm going to favor the glue on the bottom of the side plate that's remaining on the table, and I'm going to start and stop at about a ½ inch from the edge so it doesn't squeeze over too bad. Now I'm going to roll this up to about a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to hold it there for about 45 seconds. If you're watching my previous build videos, I always mention saying "You are my sunshine" in the head. It really helps to keep you from rushing the glue drying process. Alright, same process on the other side. Before we ever put glue down, we always do a practice fold to make sure everything looks good. And once we're happy with that nice crisp fold, we're back with the glue, once again favoring towards the bottom of the side plate. Rotating up to 90 and pushing firmly against the table. Alright, our 45 seconds has passed. You can see now the orientation of that A-fold looks exactly like our spar. Let's go and put this aside and prep our wings. Now you're going to notice our wing panels are two separate halves. We're going to go ahead and fix that right now by taping them together. Let's go ahead and flip this over so all of our scores and seams are facing down towards the table. And we're going to line this up carefully, trailing edge and leading edge here. We can use the trailing edge, leading edge, and these indent marks to make sure that we're happy with the fit. And this is where our dihedral is going to be, so that's going to be an open gap. Don't worry about that. Let's go ahead and take our tape. And what I like to do is I like to put one half of it down on one side first. And while holding it up, pressing the wing tight against the other side. And pressing it down. I'm just going to slice off the excess that we have here. I'm going to open this up just enough, and I'm going to favor the glue away from the seams, put a nice healthy bead, and then about 2 inches on this side. No need to go in the center because it's not going to stick to anything. We'll lay this nice and flat, and if you keep your scrap foam pieces by you, you're going to go ahead and smear that smooth. Let's go ahead and let this dry about 45 seconds. Now that our wing panels are glued together, we're going to fold it in half, and we're going to favor the edge of the table here, and we're going to go ahead and cut our bevel cut. Now we don't want to cut through the center line. We want to make sure that we just simply cut down as close to the center of the paper as possible and as close to a 45-degree angle as possible. You can use sandpaper for this step and sand this. It's just a lot dustier. You're going to notice I'm holding the blade at a very acute angle. If you hold the blade perpendicular, it's going to wander very easily. By holding it at a very shallow angle, you can use your fingers and you can guide it very easy. It doesn't have to look perfect because no one's ever going to see it once the wing's folded together. When you're done, you should have a 90-degree bevel, and you should be easily able to lift this up to at least 90 degrees without any resistance. If you have resistance, go back and cut it a little bit more closer to the paper. Now's the time that we're going to do our C-fold. Our C-fold is going to be on this back edge right here. And this is going to fold over 180 degrees firmly on top of itself. It's going to give you a nice sealed edge, especially since this plane can fly off the water. You're going to want this to be as sealed as possible. So we've done our practice fold. We're going to go ahead and lay a really thin bead right down on the paper. Be careful because the heat transfers through the paper quicker than it does through the foam. I'm going to put a nice healthy bead right down the edge. If we do the aileron mods, we'll knock those out later. I'm going to spread my hands as wide as possible. If you have smaller hands and can't reach, don't be afraid to ask a friend to give you a hand. Okay, that's firmly down. Our next step is to glue in our spar. Now you're going to notice that our servo slots and the larger servo slots line up with each other along with the center hole, but you're also going to notice index marks on 4 different parts of the wing. We're going to line all this together so that the spars line up with the index lines and also the servo and the center holes. Make sure you're comfortable with where everything is. Practice it once. You're going to notice that the larger hole extends just slightly beyond the spar. That's so the servo can fully seat up in and give you a nice streamlined lower surface. Alright, we're happy with that. I'm going to flip it over. I like to put the glue on the object that we're gluing down. That way we don't put excess glue on anything. Flip this over again. Line up on one edge. I'm kind of lifting it up. I'll rock it back and forth, smear that glue nice and thin, and then we'll line up our holes, and then we're going to press firmly down and let it dry for at least 45 seconds. This spar is going to give the wing a tremendous amount of rigidity and make it much stronger. Alright, so our next step here is we're going to start practice folding the wing over. Now we don't want to do this in one full motion because we could stress out the paper, especially if it's the white Adams Ready board. What we want to do is we kind of want to roll it up, and you're going to notice where the score cuts, it's going to naturally fall in those creases. And now with the flats of my hands, not putting too much pressure on one particular point, but spreading the pressure over all of it, we're just going to go ahead and rock this down. Now what we want to see is we want to see the center portion where the 2 creases are parallel with the bottom surface of the wing. So go ahead and make sure that you have that surface nice and pat down and it feels good. And then we're going to go back and we're going to reinforce it with a little bit of glue. I'm putting a very thin bead of glue on, and all this is doing is going into those seams so the foam doesn't fatigue in those areas. Don't put too much or you may accidentally glue this to the spar. We're going to go down, and what I like to do is kind of pat it against the spar. So I'm telling it the angle I want, but I'm not giving the glue time to set and dry. One thing I really want with these airplanes is for them to take a really good hit and to be as strong as possible. You don't necessarily need to do this step, but that extra step you do take could be the difference of 1 crash or 10. Alright, kind of patted it down for about 30 seconds. You're going to notice that the wing holds a natural curve now, and that's exactly what we want. Now we always want to make sure that we're checking out our gun to have enough glue. I have some extra glue sticks here, and I'm going to keep those handy. Now we love the AdTech Pro 200. It's a phenomenal glue gun, and if you wonder about these glue sticks, why they're milky white, this is a special blend that we use that works especially well with Adams Ready board and our Flite Test foam. Let's go ahead and we're going to first put a bead of glue right down the leading edge. Next bead of glue is right on top of the front spar. And don't worry, this glue gun's nice and hot. We have plenty of time to work with it. If you have a smaller glue gun, you may want to do 1 or 2 stripes and then leave the trailing edge. But with this glue gun, we can go right on the back edge here. Just going to favor that glue right on the back. We're going to fold it over. Same process as before, but now we're going to hold it down. I like to actually bring this to the edge of the table. And that way the backside, which actually goes down just a little bit lower than the table, can hang off the edge so you make sure you have a nice firm fit on the trailing edge of the wing. Notice I'm kind of going back and forth, pressing down on different parts of the wings, making sure nothing's riding up on me. And just a quick test we're going to check. I'll flip this over on its back, and we're going to make sure that this whole trailing edge is firmly against the top surface of the wing. That looks great. If it wasn't, we could push down on this and hold it in place until it's thoroughly dry. Alright, so we have a nice straight wing, but we need dihedral. Dihedral gives you stability in turns and also gives you a little bit of self-righting principles. This is a very easy plane to fly. We're going to put just enough dihedral in it so if you do the aileron mod, you're not going to notice any difference at all in the performance. Let's go ahead and cut this open. And what I like to do is just put a little tiny slit in the top surface of the spar so that this can open and move freely, just like you see here. Our next step is to take our dihedral gauge, and we're going to put that at the very tip of the wing, like you see here. Now, if you have to push down excessively hard here, what you need to do is raise the wing up just a little bit past that point, and then let it relax. This should be able to hold this without too much pressure lifting up this wing. Now that our wing moves freely, we're going to go ahead and apply a bead of glue, pushing the tip of the glue right down into the seam of the center of the wing so we can glue it together. I'm going to take a scrap piece of foam. I'm going to smear it down in. I really like my tape dispenser here because it's nice and heavy. I can place this very carefully down in its place. Weight it down, and instead of giving this about 45 seconds, we're going to give it about 3 minutes to thoroughly dry. Now after our 3 minutes have dried, we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove this, and what we want to see is that where we can move this, and when we move the dihedral gauge out, it doesn't drop down and separate. Once you're happy with that, we can take a piece of tape and tape the center seam. Wrap that right around the other side. I'm going to go ahead and just save myself a little bit of time in the future and open up this hole again as well. At this point, your wing is now done. We're ready to move on. Now if you're wondering about the 4-channel setup, which includes the ailerons, we're going to show you that step later once the wing is installed in the fuselage. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to assemble your fuselage, install your tail, your servos and control horns, and also your turtle deck. So with working on the fuselage, we're going to go ahead and pull out the following pieces in our kit, which you're going to notice is almost all of them. The fuselage is the last main component that we're going to need to build structurally. It's also a real pleasure to put together. Let's go ahead and go over these pieces here. What we have is the 2 doublers that go on the front of the plane. We have our main fuselage piece. We have our bottom plate. We have our formers for our top turtle deck. We have this little straw which is going to act as a pushrod guide tube. And this piece really isn't that important. But what we wanted to do in this kit is give you a triangle. A lot of people don't have triangles, and it's crucial that this plane is as square as possible. So this actual piece will fold together and give you a nice triangle to be able to use to put the fuselage together. Along with that, we also have our little tiny tail skid that we'll put in at the very end of the build. Alright, so let's go ahead and put the pieces that we don't need to weed out to the side and go ahead and prepare the other ones. We're going to go ahead just like the wing, and we're going to carve out the cavities in the following areas. Let's go ahead and hit our little center gate. We're going to peel the paper off on this guy. Hit the center of our double formers. Go right down the fuselage, using that dull end of the blade here so it can ride up against the paper without cutting through it. I like to go ahead and put these cuts along all the pieces first, and that way I don't forget which one I did and then start peeling it and have it not give me a nice clean break. Go ahead and knock this little guy out here. Don't lose this piece, we're going to need it. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with our little triangle here that we're going to build. If you already have a triangle or a square, you don't need to worry about this step. Same process as before. What I like to do is flip the fuselage piece over, that way this piece is supported here. While we're here, let's go ahead and knock out some of these holes as well. Just get everything so it goes together nice and quick. We're going to leave this guy in there. Pop these guys out. We're also going to remove our paper foldovers here and then here. Alright, so let's go ahead and lay this out here. We'll walk through each piece, talk about what we removed. So our triangle here, we just removed the center so we can fold this over and get a nice triangle square. We have our two center sections ready for foldovers. We have this piece that's ready to cover up, kind of make everything look prettier in the front. We have our push rod guides. We have our bottom plate that's already been weeded on the sides and also the front. Don't worry about popping this piece out, we'll do that later. And then we have our fuselage portion with the front ends weeded out, and then we have our nice center cavities. We're going to put most of our attention right now on the fuselage as we prepare it. Now before we put the other pieces on here, I am going to bring the rudder and the elevator into play, but there's just not enough room on the table right now, so let's go ahead and build a little bit, then we'll bring those pieces in. So the first thing we're going to do on our fuselage is we're going to glue on our doublers. Now you're going to notice the doubler has a score cut on the very back edge here. That score cut is going to line up with the score cut or the etch mark that goes through the wing. That's so this back portion of the fuselage can bend upwards. We're going to apply a nice bead of glue. Don't have to get too much. Set it down into place. Line it up perfectly on those etch marks. You're going to notice for right now I'm leaving the center portion of my wing hole in place just to give the fuselage a little bit more rigidity. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Here's our score mark. It lines up nice and clean. Press it down into place. While those are drying, let's go ahead and put our attention towards our push rod guides. Now these guys can be used without a coffee stir, but if you have a coffee stir around, it's very easy to place that down in there. Cut it just a little bit longer on both sides. This is just going to give it a little bit looser, freer of a flow, but you don't need it. One little dab of glue right in the center. Same process on the other side. Now we can take this, put a little glue on both sides. If you're not using a straw, make sure you don't get any glue down in the center there. And we're going to line up perfectly with these etch marks and press it into place. So while we're prepping this before we fold it together, let's go ahead and clean up our front edges here. We're going to place a little bead of glue right on the edge here, nice and heavy. I sometimes like to put a little bit of thin glue on the back. We're going to fold this up, count to 5, fold this forward, and then I like to do is actually pull this away so it's a nice tight seam and smears out that glue and makes it nice and strong. Now any of these techniques, if you're ever worried about them, you can always practice them on a scrap piece of foam. With our kits or if you scratch build, it's very easy to cut out a piece similar and practice a couple times. 5 seconds. 5 seconds, kind of pull it away and smear that glue nice and smooth. We're going to need our triangle, so we might as well go ahead and assemble that. Bead down the center. straight up on the table. Press that edge down nice and firm. And then press it firmly against the table for about 30 to 45 seconds. Now, as I said in the opening of this video, we do have a crafty kit. If this is a hobby that you really love and you want some really great tools that are going to last you a long time, it comes with everything you need, from the hot glue gun, the glue sticks, a craft board, razor blades, a triangle, of course, a ruler. It's a very helpful kit to give you everything you need to be able to build any of our models. So now we have our fuselage ready to go. But first, before we go ahead and bend it into place, we're going to go and slightly lift up on this edge right here and match the angle of the top plate of the fuselage. Same here. You notice I'm holding this edge down. If it wrinkles a little bit back here, don't worry, no one's ever going to see that. You don't ever want to force anything when you're building these planes. You want to naturally flow into place. So let's go ahead and do a practice fold. Now this is a B fold. A B fold is where the side plates are beside the bottom plate. So you're going to see on this etch diagram that the side plates are down beside the bottom plate. We're going to match that by keeping the bottom plate firmly against the table and rotating the side plates 90 degrees while pressing down on the table. What we want to see is we want a nice tight joint all the way on the back, and we want it to fit firmly against the table. Once we're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and take our glue, and we're going to favor the side of the bottom plate this time. Stopping and starting about a ½ inch from the edge. Raise this up, pushing against the table, hold it at the 90. I like to kind of hold this for about 10 seconds before going for my square, just to make sure everything's kind of tacked in. And then I'll hold that square up against the table, and I'll go to different parts of the airplane while it's drying. This is probably one of the most crucial areas that you want to keep everything square, because your elevator, your wings, your rudder, all of that fastens to this fuselage. So take your time and do it right. Alright, about 45 seconds has passed. You can see we have a nice clean seam all along the inside there. That looks really good. Same process now on the other side. We're going to fold this up, making sure we're doing our B fold, making sure it's firmly against the table and it sits easily at a 90-degree angle. Got plenty of glue on our glue gun. Favoring that glue on the side of the bottom plate. That way we get most strength possible. We're going to push against the table, getting a nice tight 90-degree angle. Then we'll hold it in place. You're going to notice after this is glued together, you have really nice, crisp 90-degree edges, and everything lines up very nicely. That's exactly what you want to see. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and pop out our wing panels. And we're going to grab our push rods and our tail surfaces. So I got 2 of our push rods here. In the kit we come with 4. We're only going to need 2 for this step. And we also have our rudder and our elevator. Let's go ahead and put the bevel cut in our rudder and elevator now. I'm going to take this to the edge of the table. I'm going to slightly bend this down. And typically the bevel edge will go on the moving tail surface, but on the elevator I want this portion here as thick as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my bevel on this side here. Once again, I'm keeping the blade at an acute angle. I'm not going through the paper in the center. There we are. What we want to see is we want to see a nice even motion so it doesn't fight us on the down. Let's go ahead and do the same with the rudder. Now with this rudder piece, we're going to put the bevel cut in the rudder. We got the vertical stabilizer and the rudder. The rudder steers, the vertical stabilizer stabilizes. Nice free motion from both portions. And just because we want this airplane to last a nice long time, I can use my old dihedral gauge here. We're going to reinforce this with a little bit of hot glue. Now with this step, you don't want to use too much hot glue, and you want to scrape off almost as much as you put on. We're going to put the tip of the hot glue gun down into the edge, put a nice thin bead of glue, then we're going to come right back and scrape it off. What this is going to do, it's going to take hot glue and it's going to penetrate down into the foam and really adhere the paper and the foam together and also make it very durable. We're going to do the same process on the elevator. Barely putting any glue down. Coming right back and scraping most of it off. You can see it looks nice and glossy, but there's no buildup there. We're going to give this about 30 to 45 seconds to dry, just so when we move the control surfaces, it doesn't accidentally glue our hinge shut. Let's go ahead and remove our pieces here. Okay, so we have our elevator and our rudder prepared. First, we're going to put our attention towards our elevator. Alright, we're going to do a test fit here on our elevator. We're going to press this down in. You're going to notice that the notches should line up nice and neat and pop right into place. Once again, we're using the table as our friend. We want to make sure that everything is as flat as possible to the top surface of the fuselage. That looks really good. Now this will naturally line itself and get itself nice and centered on the elevator, so you don't have to worry about how it looks. Quick little tip, if you want to kind of pinch these, it'll slide in even easier. We're going to place a healthy bead of glue right on this top surface right here. And repeat the exact same motion. There we go. Now I'm going to put light pressure on the top so I don't hurt the fuselage. I'm going to come back with a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any excess I may have. Take your time letting this dry, because if this dries crooked, your elevator is going to be crooked. Truthfully, it'll still fly okay, so I encourage you to continue with the build. It's just going to look a little funny. We're going to go ahead and flip this over now. And I'm going to go ahead and use the same technique, and I'm going to kind of pinch this bottom edge together just so we can give it a test fit. Notice this bottom piece will slide right in and pop right down. Go ahead and use our little triangle here, check it for square. And once we're happy with that, I'm going to raise this up just a little bit. And I favor a bead of glue right down underneath the elevator and press it into place. Back with a little scrap piece of foam, wipe off the excess, and then we're going to take our triangle and hold it in place until it's thoroughly dry. Give this about 45 seconds to a minute. Now that our elevator and our rudder are on, I'm going to go and flip this upside down, and I'm going to let the tail kind of stick out of the end of the table here so we have a nice surface to work off of again. We're now ready to install our push rods. Our push rods are going to go through the side slots on the fuselage, and I like to kind of open this up and kind of make it relax a little bit before sliding it through. And slide it right up in, right through that straw, and kind of help it pop out the other side like you see right here. Same process on the other side. So open up that slot. Pass it through the hole and pop it over. Now the Simple Scout is compatible with the floats that went on the Simple Cub, and for that reason we're going to want to make sure that our push rods are not going to interfere with the back plate that comes down in case you ever want to fly this with floats. Now before we put our control horns on, we're going to go ahead and take this hot glue and we'll just put a little drop on both sides. We're going to press this into place and let it dry. Now that we've installed our push rods, our next step is to install our control horns. We're going to want to use the very top hole of our control horn. We're going to carefully slide this through and down around the side. Now we can go ahead and test fit it in the first slot, and I like to support it from the bottom as I press it into place. We want to make sure that our holes are directly above the hinge line. That'll give us even deflection both directions. Let's go ahead and do the other side before we glue anything in. Same process, furthest out hole. A little rotation. There we go. And we'll press it into place. We want to make sure we have nice free motion in both directions before we glue anything down. If anything's tight, go ahead and find the source of that tightness and fix it. Alright, I'm happy with that. Simple bead of glue right there. press it down. Same process on this side. Take a little scrap piece, smear this. Now all of your control comes from these linkages, so make sure you take your time and let it thoroughly dry. Give it about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So for installing the push rods, we're going to make sure that our servo control horns go in the closest holes to the center. Now if you're more of an advanced pilot and you want to have expo, you can go to the second ones out, but you're going to have plenty of throw at the closest hole and you're going to have the most resolution. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put a Z-bend in. Now you can use linkage stoppers, but they're going to be very difficult to access in the future, so I'd strongly recommend doing a Z-bend. Now for the Z-bend, we're going to go at the very edge here, and we're going to rotate 90 degrees to the left. Now we're going to grab our pliers, about 2 millimeters in, and we're going to rotate it straight down. Now this is called a modified Z-bend. This is really good if you want to roll it in and out of the servo arm, but we don't want to do that. So we're going to take this and we're going to slowly rotate it 90 degrees to make it a classic servo arm. So we're going to go ahead and prepare our servo. To do that, we're going to go ahead and scratch this up with a razor blade. We want this to be nice and grippy and the hot glue to really be able to bite into it, because this is all of your control. Using closest hole to the screw, we're going to pop this through the hole and rotate it 90 degrees. We want the bottom of the servo facing us because we're working from the bottom of the airplane. Now you're going to notice that we don't want the servo down here, because when we put our pontoons in, it could impact it. What we want is we want it just above, like you see here. You're going to notice when we hold this nice and flat, this is nice and flat to the elevator. Easy way to make sure that the controls stay nice and flat is by going to the edge of the table and holding it against the table here. Now that we have our elevator nice and neutral, we're going to apply a nice bead of glue here. We're going to go right back down and press our servo into place. We want to make sure that our servo doesn't rise above where the wing surface is. Keep it just below. Now when we glue our servos in, we're going to want to make sure it's high enough to avoid this cavity here, but low enough that it won't interfere with the wing sliding through the fuselage. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the rudder. We do sell a Z-bend plier that makes this process very, very easy. 90 degrees horizontal, grab it about 2 millimeters in, 90 degrees vertical, and then we're going to rotate. Now I've removed the sticker on the other side of the servo and I've already scratched it up. Let's go ahead and give it a test fit, and if we're happy, we'll glue it into place. Now, I don't want these two servo arms to hit, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut this arm, the portion that I don't need off. Alright, we're just giving it a quick test fit, and once again we're making sure that our rudder stays nice and neutral. You can lay it on the table if you really want to make sure that everything looks good. Pull this up, we'll drop of glue, like to kind of smush it around, get it neutral, and then I'm just going to rotate this up and make sure that I'm not popping above or causing any issues. We're going to hold this for about 45 seconds and we're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, we kind of moved quick on this. I just want to give a quick recap here. We're going to make sure that our servos aren't so high that they interfere with the wing and aren't so low that they interfere with the pontoons on the back. We're going to make sure that our push rods have no obstructions and that everything is neutral. Now that our servos are in place, we're ready to move on to the next step. Let's go ahead and start fitting our bottom plate because we're ready to seal this up. You're going to notice that our bottom plate has a score cut. We're going to want to make sure that we bend it just slightly on that score cut so it matches the bottom surface of the fuselage. You're also going to notice another score cut up towards the front where it bevels down. Just going to kind of bend that in, like you see here. First step in test fitting, we're going to slide this in the back, line up the very edge, and then just take our hand and roll it right over the front like you see here. Now what we should see is we should see no real obstructions. We shouldn't see anything pushing up. It should be nice and flat and clean. Once we're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and do one section at a time. So I'm going to open this up kind of like a door, and I'm going to favor most of my glue on the very back edge. Checking my glue stick, I have just enough glue for this step. And you're going to notice for this, I'm splitting the difference between the glue between the foam and the paper. That's so it seals the edge nice and neat. Same process as before. And kind of start early, go right down to the bottom. But this time, I'm going to flip it over 180 degrees. I'm going to use the table as my friend. I'm going to push firmly against the table. While I'm holding it down, let's go ahead and check and make sure I'm still 90. That looks great. Give this about 30 seconds. Doesn't hurt about 15 seconds in. Give it a little rock. That way you don't accidentally glue it to the table. If you do, make sure you rotate, don't pull up. That portion's done. Get the little wires out of the way here. Now we're going to go ahead and put glue on the bottom. Let's go ahead and get an extra glue stick ready. Now our first step is we're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue. We want this to be really durable. The very bottom here, and here, and then back again the same way. Splitting the difference with that glue between the foam and the paper. Kind of work it down in there. Once again, upside down. Once I kind of hopped it around. We've been using the same wooden table for years now, and I just go back afterwards and I scrape off the excess glue. Now our last step is just like the center section. We're going to favor a nice healthy amount of glue on this bottom doubler you see here and here. Let's put a little drop in the back there. Time for another hot glue stick. Favor right on the edge, splitting 50-50. Flip it over, back on the table. I'm going to bring my triangle back just so as I push down, I'm not pushing it at an angle. It's about 45 seconds to dry. So our bottom plate is on nice and neat. Now's the time to dress things up. You can see that our fold over looks really nice here. What we're going to do is we're going to glue this paper over and roll it up so it finishes off that edge so the whole front edge is nice and covered. We want this to look as nice as possible, but also this seals the edges up to make them far more durable. Alright, so we're going to focus the majority of our glue on the doublers because we're going to be cutting out that center section. Just so we don't burn our fingers, we're going to go to the table. We're going to go ahead and rotate up to 90 degrees. And I'm just going to kind of creep this a little bit farther away from us like that. That way it's pulling that paper as tight as possible to the front of the nose. Maybe just go back and forth a couple times, rocking it. I'll throw the tail on the other side of the table so it's easier to see this step. Now that it's all glued, we can go ahead and lay this down through, and we have a score cut on the other side, so this blade should ride nice and easy right to the front. The simple cub was a rewarding process to build, but this is probably one of my most frustrating parts, was kind of making this front edge clear. So we put a lot more energy into making this part easier than the simple cub. Since we're working on the front, we might as well start putting our formers in. Now this front former is going to be lower because the top turtle deck is going to taper down towards it. Let's go ahead and put a nice bead of glue here. I'm going to kind of kick that over on there. Glue it on the top. We're going to go down to the table. We'll hold it for about 15 seconds. While I'm holding that down, I'm going to grab a scrap piece of paper and we're going to fold that over. So now the front edge is gone, we're going to make sure that this paper is folded over nice and neat so it seals that edge. Let's go ahead and put our other two formers in, but before we do that we need to prepare them. This is going to be a fold over, so we're going to put a little drop of glue over, and just like we did on our wings. These will fold together. I like to kind of push it against the table, and then flat on the table, and press it down into place. After 30 seconds, we can do the next one. Fold up, find your center, down against the table. Let's give a quick test fit before we glue these in place permanently. And find that these fit nice and snug right around the cockpit area. Alright, next step, apply a little glue. Press it into place and let it dry. Same on the back. little glue. Press it in place and let it dry. Now that our formers are glued in place, we're going to go ahead and put the poster board on. Now with the poster board has two different grains to it, so you want to make sure you cut this piece out so it bends easiest in the long direction. That means you want your grains to run this way. Now we're going to go ahead and place this over carefully, and we're just going to kind of mold this down to make sure that everything fits the way we like it. We're going to put our attention first towards the center section here, and you're going to notice this lines up perfectly with the center two plates. Also, the little tears on our speed build kit are exactly right in the middle on the very top. A very easy way to fasten this down is put a little drop of glue on both sides and line up the center as carefully as possible and hold it in place till it dries. After about 45 seconds has passed, you're going to notice that now the turtle deck is firmly attached. We're going to use a steel ruler for this step along with our table in different portions. I'm going to go ahead and carefully lift up the edge on each side, put a nice bead of glue down, and then as close to the very top of the edge, put a very, very thin bead of glue down here. I'm going to fold this over using the table as my friend. I'm going to hold this in position until it's nice and dry. Same process on the other side now. Thin bead of glue. Right at the very top edge. Down against the table. Roll it right along the formers and hold it there. Alright, so our center section's down. We're going to go ahead and put our attention next towards the back. Now you can see, since this is in the center here, when you slope this down, it meets up nice and even with the back. Once we do that, we can fold the two edges down, but first, we need to tell this where we want to glue. I like to kind of just use my nail and just put a little index mark. And then on the other side of that, favorited glue so the paper is going to cover it thoroughly. Now rather than burning yourself, you can use a razor blade or a steel ruler and hold it in place. I'm just going to go ahead, done with my triangle here, scrape off that excess. Now just as we did before, once this is dried about 35-40 seconds, we're going to start molding this back down. And we don't want it to fight anywhere. We want this to be a nice seam that's going straight down. We're going to favor our glue right on the top edge again, and then along the top edge of the paper. Back down to the table, rolling along the radius and the formers, and hold it in place. Same process on the other side. Alright, the back looks wonderful. Let's go ahead and work on the front. Just like before, we're going to do a quick test fit, make sure everything lines up and that we're happy with it. It's nice and even on the front, which is good. We want to see that down on the same amount on both sides, which is really nice. And let's go ahead and lift this up and tack the front down just like we did before. What I like to do is I like to hold this in place while it's drying. That way we don't get a dip in the center section here. Once again, hot glue on the former, as high on the edge as we can make it, and on the other side. Go this way here, right down to the table, rotate, and press and hold. You're going to notice that this poster board is black. We did that mainly because it looks the nicest on the brown poster board, and it's a little bit more period correct. Alright, our last side. So our last step on the top of our turtle deck is to trim off the excess. We can use a razor blade or scissors. I'm just going to go ahead and use a razor blade. I'm going to slice inward. just like you see here. Pushing the paper towards the former. And making a nice clean edge. One last little detail we can do on our fuselage before it's done. Let's go ahead and install a little tail skid. Quick test fit. There we go. So at this point our fuselage is now done. We have the tail assembly done, we have our servos in and centered, we have our turtle deck on. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is installing our wings. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to install the wing under our fuselage, cut out the optional ailerons, install our servos, and make it a 4-channel. Now is the time where we're going to go ahead and install our wings. Now with our wings, we want to be careful that we don't stress out the fuselage as we slide it through. We also want to make sure that we take our time and move it nice and smoothly so we don't wrinkle anything. Before we install our wing into our fuselage, we're going to go ahead and kind of condition the one edge to pass through the fuselage easily. And that's simply done just by kind of pressing your finger down and rounding off this edge so as it passes through the cavity of the fuselage, it doesn't peel. Now with the plane faced on the edge of the table here, where the table is supporting this main back portion, we're going to go ahead and start the wing in a rocking motion at an angle. You notice I'm just rocking it back and forth very carefully. And a little bit too far so we can kind of rock it back a little bit. And then I'm also going to pull the wing up towards me forward, just so it seats nice and tight against the cavity. Now would be a really great time to place the plane flat on the table and make sure that the elevator is parallel to the bottom of the table and also that the wings deflect up evenly on both sides. We're going to go ahead and go back to our square here, and you can tell right by the seam that it's very easy to center up this whole wing. Also, on the very bottom, you're going to see these marks for the ailerons where the optional ailerons can be cut in. We want that to be spaced nice and even. Along with that, we can take our square, hold it against the fuselage, and make sure it's 90 degrees. Once we're happy with all three of those, I'm going to place a nice bead of glue on the bottom of each seam and let it dry. We don't need to go too crazy with the glue because if you have a hard crash, this portion can break loose for you and you can simply re-glue it. If you make it too rigid, it could possibly damage your fuselage. So at this point, we're going to show you how to do the aileron mod to make the Simple Scout a 4-channel. Now, if this is your very first airplane, don't feel like you have to do this right now. You can always go back and do it later. The 3-channel version of this is incredibly easy to fly, still very maneuverable and aerobatic. The 4-channel version of this is very nimble. It gives you the features of flaperons, but it's not for the beginner pilot. All right, so the items we're going to need is we're going to need our 2 servos, our 2 extra control horns, and our 2 push rods. Let's first go ahead and start prepping the wing here. We're going to go ahead and cut out our cavities just by simply sliding down through and popping these out. Now we are going to go in and we're actually going to be able to cut these ailerons out, but before, since it's already in a neutral position, let's go ahead and get everything squared away with our servos and our linkages, and that way we don't have to fight 2 things. Now with the servo arm facing outwards, we're going to guide this through, right down this bar, and then reach inside the center of the fuselage and pull the lead out. Now we can go ahead and test fit, but not glue, our servo into place. I'm going to install the push rod on the closest hole towards the screw. If you're more of an advanced pilot, you can easily move it out, but you're going to have plenty of throw for great aerobatics and maneuverability, just as it sits right here. Next we're going to use the index lines, and we're going to cut the slot that's meant for our control horn. I just drag this one swipe down, just to kind of open up the cavity, and slide it in place. I'm going to use my thumb here, and I'm going to mark with my nail right where it needs to go through the hole. Get this as close as possible, but don't stress about it too much because you have plenty of material if you do need to make the push rod over again. We're going to grab it. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees towards the wingtip. Go about 2 millimeters in, and bend it 90 degrees vertical. Then we're going to cut it about 1/4 of an inch up. So this is a modified Z-bend, and we're going to leave it a modified Z-bend because now what we can do is, say we're on the top hole, we can actually slide this out and move it to different holes very carefully and give us more throw. We're going to stall currently all the way out, and if you guys like the release video, this is the exact same setup that we had when we did our release video. So you can see there's plenty of maneuverability and throw in it. And that lines up perfectly. Let's go ahead and move this to the side. If you're scratch building this, you may need to use a ruler, but what we have here is this index line that we can follow very, very carefully. The important thing is make sure you use the dull tip of your blade and don't go all the way through the paper. Slide this down into place. Just ride it right along that line. Just kind of went about halfway through. One more swipe. And now, we're going to do the same over here. One swipe. I'm going to flip it over to the sharp side now. And go all the way through. Now one thing I hate is hearing the sounds of the foam rubbing against each other. So I'm going to actually rub this back and forth a couple times, kind of smooth out this edge. And now when I crack it open, you can see it doesn't impact itself. We're going to flip this over 90 degrees. And I'm going to cut a single bevel. Always look ahead of the blade, making sure you're not going towards your fingers. There we go. Got a little bit of blunt edge here. It's kind of fighting me, so I'm going to go back right here and just get that down. Don't ever feel like you have to get this cut perfect the first time around. Got a little scrap piece of foam handy. Set this up on its nose. Just simple bead of glue. Oops. Don't worry about that. We can always wipe that off. After about 30 seconds, we can give it one last motion test, making sure that it doesn't fight us in either direction. We only need about 12 degrees deflection to fly nice and smooth. Now we can come back to our control horn one more time, slide it in place, make sure everything's nice and level. If your servo at any time moves, use your servo centering tool and recenter it to make sure that you get the best deflection in both directions. Now that we're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and place a bead of glue right down in our control horn. Press it in, let it dry right at the neutral. I'm going to carefully lift up the servo after the control horn's dried. Little drop on both sides. And then press it right back down in place. Alright, our right aileron is now done. We're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Same process as before. We're going to go ahead and slide this in. Once again, we're not cutting our aileron loose until we get everything kind of centered up. Cut the notch for our control horn. Kind of open it up with the edge here. Make sure our holes are right above the hinge line. We'll mark it with our thumb. We'll grip it 90 degrees towards the outer wing panel. Grip it about 2 millimeters in. 90 degrees vertical. We'll slide it on the furthest out hole and set it down in place. Now that we're happy with that fit, we can move this to the side. Carefully cut along the edge line. If you feel like you have to use a ruler, feel free to do so. And we're going to cut all the way through this line. Just a little push rod here, kind of open this up a little bit so it doesn't rub. Up on its nose, 90 degrees over. Anytime I have the back cut, I just kind of like to use like a sawing motion very carefully, still keeping that blade at a nice acute angle. Moves nice and freely. Go ahead and do our hot glue reinforcement hinge. Now that the glue is dry, we'll do one last test fit just to make sure everything is nice and neutral and where we want it. We're happy with that. Bead of glue, control horn goes in. Back to neutral again. We're looking to make sure these two edges stay nice and flush with each other. And then after our control horn is dry, we can delicately lift up our servo. Put a drop of glue underneath each tab. Press it in place. Anytime we make any adjustments or glue anything down, we always go back to make sure that our control surfaces are nice and neutral. Alright, at this point our wing is installed, our servos are installed, we're ready to move on to the next step. Now you're going to notice in your speed build kit that we included optional drop bombs. Those are a lot of fun and they're utilized when you fly the 3-channel version. Now we're going to include a link in the description below that takes you to the build portion. You're going to notice it's a simple cut, but it's the exact same process. We're also going to show you in this video how to build the optional pontoons as well, so if you want to fly this off the water, you'll know exactly what you need to do. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to bend and install your landing gear, and also your tail skid. Our next step in the build is to build our landing gear. Now if you're flying off of high grass, you don't necessarily need to build this portion or use this portion, but it's wonderful to take off and land with the FT Simple Scout. It's quite possibly the easiest plane to land and take off with. Alright, so let's go ahead and first start weeding out our pieces. This is really the only one foam piece that we need, and that's just the doubler that's going to hold our landing gear. So we're going to weed this out and leave it just like that. Now before we bend this, let's go ahead and push this down into the score cut and kind of make an indent on both sides. Our next step is to go ahead and bend this in half. Now this wire is 15.5 inches. For our metric friends, it's just 39.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this in half. In this case it's going to be 7 3/4 inches. We're going to take our pliers and we're going to bend a nice 90 degree. Now you're going to notice that I bent it a little bit past 90, and the reason is as we open this up, it's going to make this angle a little bit sharper and nicer. So we're just going to keep opening that up very gently until it matches up. Our next step is to measure 6.5 inches down. So I like to leave this right at the point where it begins. Go 6.5 inches down. And from there, I'm going to bend this about 40 degrees over. Nice and flat. Same on the other side. 6.5 inches. Same process before. I can take this down to the edge of the table here, and what I want to see is I want to actually bend this down to the point where this is nice and flat on both sides. You want to make sure it's not bent up or down, because that's going to cause the plane to track funny. So if you touch any part of it and it moves, just bend it so the whole piece can lay flat on the table. At this point we're ready to go ahead and do a quick test fit. We're going to want our wire to seat down just like you see here. Once we're happy with the way it fits, gently remove it. We're going to grab a little piece of scrap foam so we don't burn our fingers, and we're going to lay a nice healthy bead right down in that groove. Next we're going to press it in, and I'm going to kind of get a nice healthy amount of glue right over the top of it. Spread it out. Let's go ahead and put a bead of glue on the other side. Flip it over. And hold it in place. If any excess squeezes out, that is absolutely fine. Just smooth it out. Now if anyone's ever gotten those gift cards or hotel room key cards, things like that, a really nice hack is to be able to just go ahead and glue a piece on each side as thin as possible and then wrap it with tape. This is going to give your landing gear a lot more structural rigidity. Let's go ahead and firm this up by taking a piece of tape. I want to stick it with a little bit hanging over here. I'm just going to fold one side down. Then I'm going to pull this tight and wrap it around. While we have this in our hands, let's go ahead and slide on our wheels. You can use wheel collars, but another cool tip is just taking a drop of hot glue, put it on the shaft, let it kind of walk around there. What I like to do, just kind of spin the wheel up against it and let it dry. Same process on the other side. So the nice thing about this landing gear, it is removable. And what we got to do next here is we got to mount it in the airplane. I'll go ahead and flip over this airplane. And you're going to notice little notches here. The ones in the back are if you're using the pontoons, and the ones in the front are if you're using the landing gear. So let's go ahead, and you can use a ruler if you want, but I just simply sight it across. Cut down in here. We'll just cut along the groove. Pop it out. Now on the side here, you're going to notice two indents. We want to go ahead and take our razor blade and we want to coast down on there and go down about the depth of each cut. This is going to be where the wire is actually going to be bracing against the side of the fuselage. Once this is done, I'm just going to kind of pinch the edge. And with the rocking motion, we're going to press the landing gear into place. Now this is removable, so you can simply remove it whenever you're flying in grass that may be too tall or at a place that you don't want to land. The last thing we're going to do around our landing gear is we're going to take one of our included barbecue skewers. We're going to cut it about a ½ inch longer than it needs to be. I simply like to roll the skewer, cuts through those fibers and glues real nice. We're going to place a bead of glue right down the edge. And set our skewer in place. At this point, our landing gear and our skid are done. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is installing our electronics. Cool. Isn't that pretty?
Looks nice.
It's nice. It's not like that.
Why don't we give me a soundbite for the beginning?
Yeah.
This portion.
Yep. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to bend and assemble your landing gear and install. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to hook up your receiver, pack in your electronics, and get your center of gravity. So at this point, we're ready to install the Powerpod that we built earlier, along with making our connections in the receiver. Let's go ahead and carefully flip this over on its back. Let the tail kind of hang over on the end of the table here. And we're going to find all of our wires. So here's the wires for the rudder and the elevator. And here's the wires for the servos for the ailerons. Alright, so for typical 3-channel radios, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put the rudder in the aileron slot. So that's only if you're flying rudder, elevator, and throttle. Now if you're flying 4-channel like this plane is now built, you're going to want to assemble it where the ailerons go into the aileron port using a Y connector, and the rudder goes into the rudder, the elevator goes into the elevator, and the throttle goes into the throttle. Alright, so we got our throttle plugged into our throttle port. And we're going to go ahead, and this is the elevator lead, and you're going to notice there that you have a little horseshoe, a plus, and a minus. The horseshoe stands for signal, and the signal in this case is going to be either the white wire, or in this case the orange wire. So I'm going to plug that in elevator. The other one we're going to plug into rudder. So the conventional way to hook up the ailerons is to use something called a Y harness. Now the Y harness is going to take the signal, and it's going to send it to both servos at the same time. And because the servos are oriented opposite each other, it's going to give the proper aileron control. Just make sure you match up your yellow with your yellow and your brown with your brown. Now you can also program in this dual aileron setups like the DX9 has, and that enables things like flaperons, but that's a more advanced feature, and I strongly encourage you to fly it this way before you move on to other features like flaperons and mixing. Our aileron channel is going to go ahead and plug straight into our aileron port. Once again, we're keeping all the signal wires lined up nice and neat. Now oftentimes people are concerned whether they need to bind their receiver or not. If you bought the receiver and the radio together, you're not going to need to bind them. So we're ready to power this on and check all of our controls. Flip this over on the mains. We'll bring our ESC out here. Power on your radio first. So right now all of our controls unit work, our ailerons work, our elevator, and our rudder work. We will need to go in and do a little bit of sub trimming here. We have our ailerons just a touch low, and we can fix that by simply going to servo setup, sub trim, aileron, and then we roll the dial the direction we need to even it out. Also, we notice that our aileron is moving backwards. When I push the aileron to the right aileron goes down. We want it to go up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit back once, back into servo setup. We're going to go to reverse, click that once, roll to aileron, press it once. Once we do that, and we move it, you're going to notice that our ailerons are now moving the proper direction. Alright, so just to go over what the proper directions of the ailerons and the rudder and the elevator should be, if we move our aileron to the right, we should see the right aileron go up. That's exactly what we see. If we pull back on the stick, we should see our elevator go up. If we push right on our rudder, we should see our rudder go right. And of course our throttle is our throttle. We always make sure we leave the props off until we have everything dialed in. Now in our kit we included a throw gauge. What we have here is roughly 12 degrees and 16 degrees. What we want to have for the initial flights is 12 degrees deflection. The way we tell this is we can move this over, and if we had everything hooked up right, we'll hit exactly 12 degrees deflection. We're going to take this to each control surface. And make sure each throw is good. Now depending on your flying style, you can dial this up or down depending on how you like it. You can also move the push rods further out on your servo arm to increase the throws as well. Alright, our throws are good, our controls are moving in the right direction. Let's go ahead and button it all up and put our power pod in. Alright, so up until right now we had everything kind of dangling out. I'm going to go ahead and remove our throttle cable. I'm also going to pull out our landing gear. Just a little rocking motion, which will slide right out with a little drop of hot glue. I'm just going to sit this in here so our wires can still reach. Now I'm going to go ahead and just dress this up. I'm going to pass the receiver all the way up to the front to make my connection. Get all of our loose wires here. We can pull it all up to the front. And what I like to do is kind of roll this up and then set it up on the upper surface of the wing. There's a nice little cavity here where we can put all of our loose wires. Next step is we'll slide this in. So we're sliding the power pod back as far as it'll go. It should meet up against the back of the wing here. And now if you're doing something like a Power Pack C, you're going to have a lot more power, but you also may have to cut your power pod just a little bit shorter so the prop doesn't stick out too far. Now with this firmly down against the back, we're going to take our barbecue skewer. We're going to poke through one side, then the other. Notice that we don't just try to stab it all the way through because it's going to be very easy to miss the mark. This way, we're going to pop right out the other end. Now I like to leave this about maybe 5/8 of an inch long on both sides. Reason being is we're going to be putting our little engine stacks on shortly. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that off right there. And process again, right through the back. You can leave it just a touch long. There we have it. Let's go ahead and reinstall our landing gear. And a nice little piece that we're adding onto this is a little dummy engines. Basically with these engines, they kind of pop out the side, they have little stacks to them. We're going to go ahead and glue those up together right now. Notice I'm not putting them on the engine stacks, just lining them up and press it into place. There's one. Second one's going to be the mirror of that. And there's two. Once these are dried, all we need to do is just slide them into place. Where the barbecue skewers are, works really good as looking like little tiny spark plugs. So we're going to leave those just a touch long and trim them to length. There we go. So now our Powerpod is firmly attached. We have a nice decorative piece. We're ready to put on the prop and balance it. Alright, so our prop installs very easily. Now this new Powerpack B, the props actually have a little tiny notch in them. That enables them to kind of slide right over. And you're also going to notice in our Powerpack B that we include a smaller prop too. That's in case you want to fly 4-cell or you're flying something like an FT Explorer that takes a 9-inch prop. So spin this on. Tighten it down with a pair of pliers. We'll flip it over one last time. In my mind, I always say fuzzy fuselage just to kind of remind me which side to put down. It doesn't matter as long as your battery has the opposite side. I'm going to go ahead and cut this to about maybe 3 inches. And we're going to stick it in place. Now if you look at the bottom of the plane here while it's on this back, you're going to notice 2 holes. Those are its balancing points. The balancing points are going to be where you put your fingers to get the proper center of gravity for your airplane. The way the center of gravity is going to be decided is by the battery that you use and how you position it. Now our battery of choice for this build and for beat packs right now is this 1200 milliamp Hyperion battery. 60 Cs means it can give you plenty of amp draw, but it also gives you 200 more milliamps for the same size and form factor as a Lumineer 1000 milliamp. So we're going to go ahead and place this into position. And I'm going to line this up right with the front of the firewall right here. Now generally if you build, every build's going to be a little bit different. When you put the battery there, the plane's going to balance just perfectly. One thing I strongly recommend is whenever you balance your first plane, have it be a touch nose heavy. Make sure that nose drops just a little bit. Reason being is it's a lot easier to fly a nose heavy airplane than a tail heavy airplane, but also it's very hard to tell what level it is. Generally with all the planes I design, they like to be just a touch nose heavy. So at this point, our plane is officially done. We're ready to take it out for its maiden flight. All right, we are now ready to fly the FT Simple Scout, but unfortunately, the weather's not looking so good. So check out this montage.